When did you move to Sweden?
In 2009.
2009.
So yeah, I do speak Swedish.
I see. From the UK?
Yeah.
And how long did you live there?
5 years.
5 years?
About.
Oh.
Oh, yeah.
Where did you study?
In Oxford.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, that was pretty nice.
My mom studied in Cambridge.
Aha. And the other university.
They're like feuding, right?
Yeah. They are, like, Oxford is the oldest.
Yeah.
But yeah, Cambridge is it's always like who is ending up higher in the rankings and who is winning the boat race and like all those kind of things.
Yeah.
So I like Cambridge as I don't really know that much of the university, but I like the town better than Oxford.
Okay.
Because Oxford has all these walls around the colleges, so you basically don't really see the colleges. And the history of Oxford, or the thing that that the people in Oxford say about tell you about the start of Cambridge is probably different from what they tell you in Cambridge.
Oh, yeah.
But in Oxford there used to be a big tension between the town people and the gowns. They call the university people the gowns.
Okay.
And it's still a bit like that.
Yeah.
But in the old days, there was a lot of rioting, and there's like it was just not so much fun. So the people couldn't really leave the colleges. So all the colleges have walls and big doors, and then some Oxford dons got sick of that, and they wanted to live more freely. So they moved to a swamp called Cambridge.
Of course.
But actually, they have a nicer. Have you been to Cambridge?
Yeah.
Yeah, I like it more that they have more openness. You can see the colleges, you can look into it, and in Oxford.
Very proud of it.
Yes.
Here's our college, and here's another one.
Yeah. Oh man, it's crazy. As a sort of very down-to-earth Dutch person, it was a little bit of getting adjusted to the mentality in Oxford, I have to admit.
Oh, right.
But yeah.
Okay.
We can also move that, huh? That's it's on wheels. Yes.
Right.
So if that works better, we can just roll it out.
Yeah, I think so.
Because this also, we just had to clean up a space where we were making things. So that's just
I see.
there's nothing really of value in there.
I see.
Scientifically.
I see.
Whoa, what's this?
That is a sport trap, an active sport trap. So it's sort of the thing makes sure that it is directed on the wind, and then I think it's actually even a sucking trap, so it will suck in air and spores.
Okay.
Kan du flytta till position, Oskar?
Ja. Där.
Där.
Ja.
Grymt. Och där, ja. Maartje, could you look at the bottom corner of that cabinet here over there? Okay, great. Let's see. Yeah, so we actually have been visited the Kolmården Stavsjö area where the Barskogsnunna attacked 125 years ago, sort of. And we met this fella called Bengt, and he showed us around. His father was a drove the train. Because when the outbreak happened, they built this train track.
Okay.
And because it was so much force and they weren't used to cutting down
Large areas.
Okay. Yet. So they built this train track, and it's been like almost a big cultural thing in Stavsjö and Kolmården. And there were like loads of visitors. So all because of this outbreak, they built this train track, and there was so much tourism in Kolmården because of that outbreak. So this was like one of those positive things that happened because of an outbreak. But they also they cut down the forest when the outbreak had passed.
Yeah.
And they spent like 12 million kronor on building the train track, and this was 19.
Yeah, this is a lot of money.
Yeah, so very
For
much.
then it's just like
Yeah, and it was 3,000 hectares of forest, that outbreak. Do you think it was worth building it? Because or do you think like the moth that they would have spread, or do you think that an outbreak only happens for a certain area? So
that's a difficult question, because I know that they have actually controlled the outbreak by spraying at that time, which at that time probably was a good decision. Outbreaks generally, they last over about 7 years, and they will build up. They might spread out, but they might also just stay very local. So it is a little bit hard to make predictions on what would have happened if you wouldn't have done anything. One of the things that, it would have, the idea would be that after 7 years it would be dying out naturally with a lot of dead larvae and a lot of dead trees. But you don't really, that's the theory. And what would happen in real life, it's always a little bit hard to say. So the evidence, based on what I know about the nun-moth, I would say that if there is local outbreaks, and they stay local. So if it doesn't spread, or if it doesn't start at a large scale, it's probably going to stay local. But at the same time, you have to make decisions based on the knowledge that you have then. So I think trying to control it at that time was probably a good strategy. And then, with all the consequences of that.
Maybe they didn't know so much about the moth back then.
I think as well. I mean, you see, suddenly you have a larvae or tons of larvae that are eating your forest. It's scary. I mean, if you've not experienced it before, it's not nice. You don't really know what's going to happen, and even now, it's very hard to predict what would happen. And that is for me, it's the interesting about working with insects and insect population dynamics, because you can make educated guesses, but they remain estimates, they remain guesses. So you always have to there's always a probability, a chance that it won't happen the way you think it will happen. And you don't really want to be on the end of the wrong predictions. So it's hard. And I think, I mean, at the time you have to, what we usually do when you have, when you deal with damaging insects or damage in the forest, you think about risk. And a risk is then it's a probability, like how high is the chance that my forest gets infested, and how much of that forest would be infested. and die as a consequence of that. And what would then be the economic impact, the ecological impact? So you have like a bunch of things that you would consider when you have a problem with an insect before you actually start to think to put in control measures. And what we now know a bit better is how to use different strategies to try and contain, to try and prevent large outbreaks and to try and contain large outbreaks. Because what they, if I think that they sprayed DDT back then, and that is something that now would just not be in any way possible anymore. And also, I mean,
DDT, what's that?
That is it's a white. It is an insecticide that is that actually stays in the system very long. So it was used in the old days, especially after the Second World War, up to the 60s, I think, 70s. It was used to just basically kill anything. But the consequence of it was also that birds were dying and that it stayed in the food chain. So the bird of prey suffered a lot because they are the apex predator for many places. And what happened with birds that would get DDT in them is that their eggshells would be thin. Mm-hmm. So they would actually break before they could hatch. Mm. So especially bird of prey was affected by that. So those kind of insecticides, you would think that we wouldn't use them anymore, but there is a lot of there's still a lot of insecticides out there that are said to be targeting a specific group of species or a specific species, but that they're actually much less specific than we think they are. So that's I'm more for what we call integrated pest management, where we look at how can we manage the forest to prevent, to create a forest that is that can withstand outbreaks better, that with trees that are healthy, so that they can actually tolerate a level of defoliation, and then also, so if it happens, how can we control in a certain way? But we also need to then know what is going on. I mean, we don't, like with spruce bark beetle, that is one of the most recent large outbreaks. We have a way of monitoring, and still we got a little bit, I wouldn't say surprised, but the drought was extraordinary that caused the latest outbreak. But then we have steps in place to try and contain the outbreak. And so for this species, the non-moth, I would say we need to start understanding better what is happening with the population. I mean, we haven't seen outbreaks for a very long time, which is good, I guess. But then we now hear that that their densities are increasing in Finland, that there is an expansion north. There's indications that this is the same in Sweden. So we need to create a certain level of preparedness for calamities, so that we don't suddenly have an outbreak and we have had no idea that it was coming. And you can do that by keeping track of the population, by using different techniques.
Okay. I think Bengt, who also made this movie, where he sort of documented he gathered all of the documents known back then. He made this in the 80s, and he also mentioned that they put glue around the trees to keep the larvae from, when they climb down on the ground to go to the next tree, they will get stuck on the glue. You think that is
We still use it actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I still have sticky tape. We use it as a, but yeah, it is one of the ways to prevent, to try and prevent the colonization of new trees. But I mean, if the densities are very high, you have to be extremely vigilant for all the trees where you have the stickies, because the moment the sticky, there is actually a space where, for example, two larvae are sort of next to each other so that the other ones can go over it. They will find that. So it's not foolproof. You probably will reduce the density somewhat. But yeah, you get at least, the least thing you get is a very good estimation of how many, what the extent of the larvae population is.
Okay, cool. And like these larvae and the moths, are they still around in Kolmården?
Well, they are in the whole of southern Sweden, so I assume that they are also there in Kolmården. But they are at low density, so they just do their thing. And at the moment, in the recent history, we haven't heard of any new outbreaks of the nun-moth, so they're just hanging out.
Also, I read in Selma Lagerlöf's Nils Holgersson, the novel, they're mentioning that the trees are like crickling and like the knarrar in the trees. Is that like a made-up thing, or?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily expect the trees to make sound, but there's colleagues that actually are listening to trees, so they might disagree with me on that. But what I can imagine is that if you have so many larvae eating on needles, you will hear it. You actually, and then the other thing that you will hear is the fraise, the feces of the larvae falling down, and that is almost the sound as if it rains. If it's that high densities, because they just eat, it's basically like one channel. So yeah, it's so I can imagine that there is sounds that you can associate with an outbreak. But because the larvae are basically feeding on the needles, I don't think the tree itself make that sound.
Okay. Well, it seem to add like a scary note on
the but you can be sure. I mean, what it describes is that the tree is suffering, and the tree is suffering. I mean, if you have a 40,000 larvae eating on your needles, then it doesn't make you very happy, because that is the main way you get, like a tree gets its food in. So like photosynthesis, the needles are the most important part of that. So if that disappears, you can be sure that the tree is not happy. So that to describe it in that way, I think is very original, and approaches what probably the tree goes through in such a situation.
Okay. Which of the barrskogsnunna and the lövskogsnunna do you think is like the biggest threat today in Sweden?
If you would have asked me that a year ago, I would have said lövskogsnunna, because of its tremendous history of outbreaks in Central Europe and its invasive capacity in North America. But when I started looking at the data of the nun-moth and the reports of the nun-moth over time in Sweden, and compare them to the spongy moth, then to me it seems actually that the nun-moth is the one that is going that is at the moment expanding its range, increasing its densities, if you look at the observations.
Okay. And what do you think? What do you think about the future? And like, say, 100 years. So it's a very hard question.
Yeah. It depends. It really depends what is going to happen with the climate. If it's going to increase in the sort of, well, you would almost say gentle way as it's going now, I would expect that to a certain extent there will be a move northwards. How that then affects potential outbreaks, I find that really hard to say, because that is also a combination with the predators of the non-moth, the quality of the food, and that will vary over the latitudes when you move north. So from the trends that I see now, I can see an increase and an expansion. So at the south, the population densities are increasing, and at the north, they are moving further northwards. And that is typical for a range expansion. So the question is, what would then be the newest limit for the range, and where would it stop? I mean, if the moment they can feed on lots of different tree species, so they are not necessarily restricted to spruce or to pine. It really depends on many different factors, how far they can go north. And also maybe pine and spruce in 100 years can grow in Lapland. Or they grow in Lapland now, but much better further north.
Okay. And what are some of the other insects that are going to be a threat in the future, you think? Or are we going to see some new threats in the future because of the climate change and the global warming?
I think one of the... when I would talk about that, I would mainly talk about emerging pests and invasive pests. So emerging pests are species like non-moth that have a history, that are native to Sweden and that might become a problem in the future. And then you have a thing like that we call invasive species or invasive pests, and they are brought here through trade, through human movement, and we see different species that have already arrived here. Luckily, no real forest species, or there are new forest species that have come here, but they seem to just blend in the system. So then we have, we know certain species that are on the way, like the emerald ash borer. That is one of the species that we expect to arrive here anytime soon, but that's because it's already moved from Russia through Ukraine, and it's moving with about 30 kilometers a year. But because many of the responses are so species specific, it's really hard to say, okay, this species was a problem in Central Europe and therefore it will now be a problem in Scandinavia. We just really need to keep an eye out. We need to be more vigilant with following trends, with trying to sort of understand and listen to our neighbors, what they see happening, to understand, okay, so what do we need to look out for? Because at the moment, there are so many insect species, and often in other countries, it's the insect species that they are really surprised about that give the new problems. But what we can see worldwide is that the artificial movement of species is one of the things that is causing the most damage at the moment. So I'm a little bit worried about, or I would like to know more about what is happening with our native species, but I think it's really important to keep an eye on the non-native ones.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier that spruce is very sensitive to drought, and when they is affected by drought, these insects are more willing to attack. Yeah. Could you describe that a little bit?
So as I mentioned earlier, is that the recent spruce bark beetle outbreak is a direct response to the extreme drought that we had in 2018. We know that spruce trees need a lot of water, and that if they don't have that water, their defense system is basically collapsing. So that means that spruce bark beetle can bore into the bark. What it could mean for other insects is that the needle quality is improving because there's less defense compounds in the needles then as well. So drought in general weakens trees. Drought also in itself can kill trees. I mean, we now see, for example, colleagues of mine are looking at trees that are dying now, but that could have been the consequence of drought stress years earlier. So drought is a big problem, not just in combination with insects. So.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Great. And in the forest in Finland, there have been outbreaks of the lövskogsnulla, right? Or just spotted?
Barskogsnulla.
The barskogsnulla. Yeah.
Outbreaks, I don't know, but they have seen that the larvae are increasingly contributing to defoliation of. So there is damage observed, but there is a difference between an increase in endemic densities, as we would call it. Like we usually speak about endemic damage and epidemic damage. And endemic damage is something that's always there. It's background damage. There will be always insects feeding on trees. There will always be insects in the forest. And for many reasons, that's a good thing. So you will always have, they estimated, I think, between 10 and 20% defoliation on average as background damage. Then the difference with epidemic damage is that you suddenly have an increase in one or a group of species that will really either defoliate trees to the extent that they are really suffering and reducing growth, or even, as you can have with spruce and nun moth, that they die. And what, at the moment, if I understood the literature correctly, what is happening in Finland is that the densities are increasing, but that they do not necessarily have epidemic densities yet. So that it's not an outbreak, but that it's an observation of just more moths being around, so more larvae being around, just a generally higher population densities, but that it hasn't reached catastrophic proportions yet. So I have not heard any reports for that.
Okay. And about the future again, are you feeling hopeful?
I mean, I think we need to be realistic, as in that maybe the biomass production, that we have to make some concessions. We have to we have to think a little bit about how we do forest management, how we create, what kind of stands we would want to have, what type of diversity we would want to create. But I think that, talking to people that are working in that field, that the awareness is very big. So that something needs to change is clear. But how and what is really hard to say, because there's many different ways on how you can reduce insect damage. But then you have a lot of other aspects to consider as well, like biodiversity, for example, and sustainability. So to throw in two big words. So it is a challenge, I think, for the future. It is a challenge to keep up biomass production. Also because there is indications that there is something going on with the trees itself. So it's not just damage by insects and pathogens that is a threat for the future. It's also climatic conditions and the adaptations of the trees that we're using to that. But I think with choices like by creating landscape diversity, for example, and stand diversity in different ways, then that you create a more or a less vulnerable system for many different damages. But we shouldn't close our eyes for it, because it's, as we have seen in the past, like in the last years, it seems that the damages are increasing, and there is, especially for the pathogens, there seems to be diseases popping up that were never really a problem, that now suddenly are becoming very apparent. And I can say that for insects we haven't seen it to that extent. We worry about one insect, and that is spruce bark beetle, and pine weevil, and they both have different ways of working for them. But I'm sure that it can be not solved. We need to learn how to live with the damages, but there is a possibility to control and to live to manage it.
Just wait to
Okay.
come.
Okay, I only have one more question actually, and it's a bit of a controversial one.
Uh-oh.
I think, or I don't know, because it's something I don't really know, but do you think like the forest industry and the scientists do you think there is a communication problem between them?
As far there is in the sense that we often talk from different angles. So my experience has taught me that it takes some time before you understand each other, because you use different words for different things. You have different perspectives from which you talk. So you need to understand each other's perspective first. From my perspective, I don't think it is necessarily a communication problem, but the time that we take to develop the communication. I have a feeling that scientists, especially when it comes to forests, and the debate is now so polarized, we are often accused of something. Either we are too much on the forestry side, or we're too much ecology, But at the same time, what I try to do in my research is to merge ecology and forest entomology in a way that it will benefit both the industry and more general forest objectives, sort of not just biomass production. And I think that many people within the forest industry are very much on that line as well. The problem is that if it's hard to sort of, if you don't have the time and there's many different people sitting in between, you can't really develop these dialogues. And what I really like, for example, about having this forest damage center that has started at SLU is that it brings the industry or the forest owners and the production companies together with scientists. And we're not only talking about how to have the tree grow best, we're talking also about how to create a healthy forest. And there is different aspects that we then need to keep in mind. And I think this well, from my perspective, and this is definitely only from my perspective, is that this kind of controversy that you see in the media is often created to, I don't really know why, but because it's easier to say, oh, this person is for and this person is against biodiversity conservation, or forest companies are bad and Natuurvårdsverket is good, or whatever. It's like it is so. Everything seems to be black and white, and I think what I see in my department here, where lots of people work with insects, different types of insects, different types of questions, agriculture, forestry, is we all try to work together with the idea. And of course, we are a agricultural university, and we are a sector university. So it's part of our assignment to look at, to serve the public as well. And what I see my colleagues do, what I do, is that we try to understand, okay, so what are the problems? I mean, we need to eat. We need to have wood. I mean, we can't just say, okay, we need to put everything, we need to let all the wood stand, because how are we going to build things? What are we going to use for that then? And of course, there's different solutions, and you can think about more or less intensity, but we can try and do to create a situation that is good for many purposes. This summer, I've been driving around in Sweden again quite a bit, and you see these cornfields with these blue flowers, or yellow flowers, or white flowers, or all of them. And that is a new measure by the government that is brought forward by scientists to stimulate pollination, to stimulate insects, to stimulate biodiversity. And that to be able to do those kind of, what you almost would think, simple things, there is a lot of research that goes into that. And that is what we're doing with forests as well. Only you don't see it so much, because forests are much longer lived. So there is a lot of work going on. And I know that forest companies also do a lot of work. And I think, listening to each other is an important part of that. And it doesn't always go well, because yes, of course, we are all humans. But I do think there is a dialogue, and that SLU is trying to facilitate that dialogue. And that this initiative with the Forest Damage Center is also very much facilitating a dialogue and increasing understanding between research and industry. So I'm hopeful for the future in that sense as well. Very much.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Nice.
I think that's it, actually.
Yeah. Just a little.
Introduction.
A little presentation.
Yeah, you can just,
I haven't really thought about that.
you can just say hi and watch.
Of this moth.
Mm.
So, and then of course, So that is, and it would be really interesting to choose some of these regions and then play around with that as well, because, but then you have to have some sort of validation of the data first.
Mm.
So, but in Finland they do see really an increase, and it seems that although not really analyzed as such, it seems to be the same case in Sweden.
Oh.
So I think that's to me that is super interesting.
Yeah.
So then I thought this is quite cool as well. This is a book from, it doesn't look like it, but I think this was first published in 1988. Yes. So, and this is a Danish guy that has written this book chapter on the non-moth in European forests. And he has made this map.
Uh-huh.
And what he basically tries to say with this is that this is kind of, this part is in that time the core outbreak area where there's rather frequent outbreaks.
Yeah.
And then you have adjacent outbreak areas where there is a little bit less frequent outbreaks. And then you see that Denmark and Sweden, southern Sweden, they are in the periphery of, and there can be outbreaks, but it doesn't really happen so often. And that is also what we've seen in history. There is outbreaks in the 50s, in the 70s, in the 80s, up to the 90s. But recently we haven't had any outbreaks, as far as I'm aware. And I checked, we have this reporting system for damages in forest called skogsskade. And I checked that, and there's no reports of barrskogsnunna or nunmoth, and no reports for lövskogsnunna. Spongy moth, sorry. I'm just trying to find the English name. So that means that although it exists, which we know from our portalen, it doesn't cause damage. And it hasn't caused damage for quite a long time, or at least since the beginning of skogsskade. I'm getting a bit warm, so I'm taking my lab coat off if that's okay.
But have you seen damaged trees from lövskogsnunna?
No. The interesting thing is that
Even in Finland?
Well, they say that it has contributed to increased damage. Okay. So they have increased defoliation of trees. Oh. But there is a difference. I mean, when we talk about damaging insects, we always talk about endemic damage and epidemic damage. And endemic damage is just something that just occurs because they are alive. They are still there. Epidemic damage is damaging to the trees, so you can actually see it. But the problem with these kind of insects is that it's not like spruce bark beetle, where suddenly the conditions change and you have enormous amounts of dying trees. So we understand how spruce bark beetle outbreaks start. It's a little bit less clear how they end. But with these kind of species, it's quite clear that they end either through disease or through increased pressure of natural enemies, and mostly a combination of those. But because we can't really see the start of it, we can only go back and make some predictions. Think, okay, so it's logical that probably the winter survival has something to do with it. It's logical maybe that larvae development has something to do with it. So then you test different things to see what has started the increase. But it's very hard to actually spot when a population starts to increase. And therefore you would really need to do rather detailed monitoring in sensitive areas. And that's costly. So that's just difficult, and you might not even be able to say, oh, now it's on the go. It's really hard. It might just be that you see, one year you see a little bit of larvae around, and the next year suddenly there is or you see suddenly at the end of the season you see a lot of males flying. They're quite conspicuous, so that's not the big problem. They're white, so there are descriptions of clouds of males flying into forests, looking like it's snowing. But that's from the 1800s. We don't use that colorful language anymore. Right. But so you can see it, but then when you see it, it's often too late. So that's a bit of a problem.
Okay, I see.
Because then the moment you observe it, there is already an outbreak. Yeah,
it's described in like there's this I don't know if he's a scientist or not, but he's quite of a nerd when it comes to the outbreak in Kolmården.
Okay.
And he wrote this sort of novel about the events that happened, but he took some freedom on the story himself, and he's writing about two bums living in the forest.
Okay.
and he's describing like they're seeing this spruce, and you can't see the stem because it's covered with these barrskogsnunna, and then they look up and they can't see the sky because it's
Yeah.
They're flying everywhere. You know.
I read that a single spruce
Yeah.
can have about 40,000 larvae on it
Okay.
at height of outbreaks. So the densities can be extreme.
Oh.
And they are, larvae generally are ferocious. They just eat and grow. I mean, they go in a few weeks from about this size, I think, to this. The fun thing was, when after I'd spoken, I think I'd spoken to Sverker, yeah. I got we are now starting a monitoring project, and one of my aims is to get a bit of a handle on this species. And one of the persons working with collecting collecting the data, and she sent me a picture and said, "Oh, Maartje, do you know what this is?" And I'm looking at it and I'm like, wow, it was a nun-moth larvae. And I was like, I've seen them in the forest, but it was so funny because it was like the question that you posed is, are there still nun-moth in Kolmarden? Yeah, clearly they are. But to then, for people to see larvae in the forest, that's quite rare. They are not so conspicuous, they are quite inconspicuous. So.
Okay.
But they can go once they get really big, and if there would be so many, because I think the biggest, like the last instar, is about well, how much would that be? 7 centimeters or something,
oh, yeah.
5 to 7. It's a good sized caterpillar.
Oh, yeah.
So if you have 40,000 of those on the spruce is
yeah.
not going to like it.
No.
So and the other thing that they do is they eat the flowers. One of the interesting things of the nun-moth is that they are dependent on spring phenology of the spruce trees, because they feed on the buds and on the flowers. So if they are not synchronized with that, they have a bit of a problem finding food. So one of the hypotheses on why outbreaks might start off is that they have one or 2 years in a row where this synchronization is very, very good, so that they actually can eat the best food for them and have increased, that the females will then have more eggs, the males can fly farther, the females might also even be able to fly a little bit farther, because the females are rather heavy with eggs, so they are not recorded to fly so much. But outbreaks seem to spread because of this migrating females. But then at the same time, they have observed in the past that these outbreaks can be synchronized over large areas. And that that is not necessarily insects moving around. That can also happen because of similar weather conditions. So what then would happen is that you have, for example, a spring that is very beneficiary for the nun-moth larvae. They hatch, their food is there, they can start eating. And if that and weather is correlated over large areas, so if that happens and there is already a good representation of the population present, you get a large synchronized growth of the population. So, but I don't want to be alarmist, because I don't really understand why we have not seen any outbreaks. I mean, I know that there has been outbreaks in Lithuania. I know there's been outbreaks in Poland. And also, if we look at the old map, then they are also on the periphery. They are not in the center. So there is something is moving. But we have had outbreaks of Limantria monaca in the past, in Denmark, in Sweden. But the last, so how many years? 35 years. We have not really seen anything.
Maybe it's just a matter of time.
Let's not hope so. So, it could be. I mean, this is something that and that we really need to think about. Like, you can't just say, okay, so the climate conditions will move in one go. Like, there's other aspects that determine insect population dynamics as well. And there's other aspects that then will determine climatic conditions. So it doesn't mean that what we used to have in Central Europe will be exactly like that. What we will have in Sweden, and maybe already now, even though the overall climate patterns might be the same, how the weather in the end the local weather will turn out is very different. So it is hard to make predictions, and I would like to know more to be able to say whether or not it is really a threat. We need to know more, and we need to. I do think we need monitoring for that, and targeted monitoring for this species, because there is other species that we might be able to expect to. So, but at the moment, based on, for example, the spongy moth, Løvskogsnønnene, that species, I thought was a better candidate for this, and for basically spreading its range and for being better, doing better north at the moment. But it's not. I mean, it's not better than nun moth. It seems to be doing it doesn't seem to change that much. So there is different, and this is the difficulty with predicting species responses or overall responses to climate change, because every species has its own sort of context. So every species has its own natural enemies, has its own response to the plant that they are eating on, and so some species will do better and some species will do worse. But it could also be one of the things that they think, for example, with the nun moth, is that one of the interesting things about this species is that the larvae overwinter as fully formed larvae in the egg. So they will the whole winter they will be a larvae in the egg, and that means that they are also vulnerable to temperature fluctuations. So, but if we normally had winters that were rather cold, so that the larvae didn't get activated, nothing would happen, then they had a good chance of surviving, as long as it wouldn't go below -40. The largest part of the population would survive. But if it then gets too warm, they might be more active over winter, the whole time. So they might actually have, especially if then the synchrony with their host plant is a little bit off, they might not have enough reserves to gap the bridge that they used to be able to do. If they would have had a cold winter, then they wouldn't have used a lot of their nutrients, and then they would be able to balloon its way to a different tree, or just be hungry for a couple of days, weeks, until they could find their food. But if the winters are in a certain way, then that might actually mean that they will, if they are too warm, it might mean that they will actually have a worse winter survival, so that there will be more larvae dying over the winter. So all these things,
a factor for that it's been outbreaks in Lithuania and not in Sweden, because we have a harsher winter.
Yeah, it could be. Definitely, because at the moment it still seems to be that the warmer winters are still beneficiary. So there could be a point where warmer winters become detrimental.
Okay.
So, but at the moment, especially south. I mean, I have hopes for the north, but especially south, there is hardly any winter there anymore.
No, exactly.
So,
maybe we could do a more structured interview from here.
Yeah, if you just let me talk then.
Yeah, now you know what questions.
Ja.
Okay.
Ska vi byta objektiv med varandra?
Det ska vi.
Och så om du står här.
Jag kan dra på...
Myggan på den här?
Ja, kan jag inte. För den där är bättre, för det håller på... Det skiftar ju med ljuset.
Ja, det skiftar mycket med ljuset.
Jättemycket.
Det är faktiskt irriterande.
Vilket är superjobbigt. Men om man har här...
Ja.
Så funkar det nog, för då blir det inte lika mycket. Det är mest någonting här utanför som gör att det skiftar lite.
Ja.
Så måste man här så är det bättre. Jag slutar.